The official color of our contractor's portable toilet was Tidy Blue 200, a shade of synthetic cerulean so bright it could likely be seen from space. According to Brenda, the self-appointed queen of all she surveyed, it was also a direct violation of the Sterling Creek Estates Homeowners Association Covenant, Article 4, Section 2B, which clearly stated that all temporary structures must be of a muted, earth-toned palette. She didn't get out of her car, of course. That would require effort and expose her orthopedic yet fashionable sandals to the horrors of a construction site. Instead, she glided to a halt in her pearl-white Escalade, a vehicle less driven and more piloted, like a suburban aircraft carrier, and the tinted driver's side window purred down just enough for her to peer over her designer sunglasses. "Mark," she said, her voice carrying the strained pleasantness of a customer service representative reading a script. "We have a problem." I was standing in what would one day be our living room, but was currently a skeleton of 2x4 and plywood under a vast blue sky. I put down my tape measure and walked to the edge of the new foundation, the red Georgia clay clinging to my boots. "Brenda, to what do I owe the honor?" "The lavatory," she said, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the offending blue box. "It's not beige." I blinked. "It's a toilet, Brenda, a temporary one. They don't generally come in custom shades of taupe." "The rules are the rules," she chirped, a hint of steel entering her voice. "They exist to protect our property values. An unapproved color can be jarring to the community's aesthetic." My internal monologue, a sarcastic and perpetually exhausted narrator who had been working overtime for weeks, kicked into high gear. "Jarring to the community's aesthetic? Lady, my entire house is currently a pile of lumber and dirt. You're worried about the toilet." "I'll see what I can do," I said, which is code for, "I am going to do absolutely nothing and hope you forget." She gave a tight, satisfied smile, as if she'd just successfully negotiated a nuclear arms treaty. The window purred back up, and the Escalade whispered away. This was Brenda in a nutshell. She was the HOA president, a title she wore with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. In the 2 years we'd lived here, she had authored the infamous Wind Chime Edict of 2024, which limited wind chimes to 3-note melodies in a minor key, and personally measured the height of everyone's lawn with a ruler. She was the suburban warlord, the queen of beige, and the primary reason my blood pressure was inching towards alarming new heights. My wife Sarah and I had bought this house for a reason. It was a small, slightly dated ranch in the best school district in the county. The plan was simple: live in the small part for a year, save up, and then build a massive 2-story addition off the back. It was our dream, the forever home we'd sketched on napkins and planned for a decade. We had permits from the city, a loan from the bank, and a set of architectural plans that had been, ironically, approved by Brenda's own architectural review committee 6 months prior. The problem, as our contractor Dave had warned me on day 1, was the difference between paper and reality. Dave was a man carved from oak and cynicism. He'd been building houses for 40 years and had the weary eyes to prove it. On our first day of demolition, he'd pulled me aside, a thermos of black coffee in his hand. "Got your city permits, got your county approvals, all squared away," he'd grunted. "That's the easy part." He'd nodded towards Brenda's Escalade as it cruised slowly past. "It's the lady in the white tank you gotta worry about. An HOA president with too much time on her hands is more dangerous than a termite infestation and a flash flood combined." He wasn't wrong. In the first 3 weeks of construction, I'd received a collection of official-looking violation notices that would have been hilarious if they hadn't come with threatened fines. There was a notice for a pile of lumber being aesthetically displeasing. A formal complaint that Dave's crew had started their nail guns at 7:05 a.m., a full 5 minutes after the legally permitted start time of 7 a.m., a discrepancy Brenda claimed to have verified with the atomic clock. My personal favorite was the warning about excessive dust, as if building a house could be accomplished through quiet meditation. I'd tried being reasonable. I printed out the permits, highlighted the approved work hours, and walked her through the plans again. She had listened with that same tight smile, then said, "The committee may have overlooked the spirit of the community's aesthetic. I'm here to enforce the spirit, Mark." Now, as I watched her drive away, I looked at the bright blue porta-potty, a jarring, glorious beacon of defiance in a sea of HOA-approved beige. I decided it was my favorite thing on the whole property. A low rumble signaled the arrival of the concrete truck, ready for a footing pour. Dave walked over, wiping his hands on a rag. "Let me guess," he said, nodding in the direction Brenda had gone. "The crapper's too blue?" "Jarring to the aesthetic," I confirmed. He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Just wait. We got the big framing and fire blocking inspection next week. She'll find a way to claim our fire extinguishers aren't a regulation shade of red. By the way, the fire marshal's office called. Confirmed for next Tuesday, 3:30 p.m. Guy named Frank Miller. He's a hard ass, but a fair one. Hates two things in this world: bad wiring and people who think they're above the law." "Good to know," I said, the name Frank Miller lodging itself in the back of my mind. At the time, I had no idea how important that second thing would turn out to be. Tuesday arrived on a wave of oppressive humidity and pure, unadulterated stress. The framing and fire-blocking inspection was the big one. It was the structural backbone of the whole project. Failing it would mean tearing things down, costly delays, and a lecture from Dave that I was in no mood to receive. His crew was a whirlwind of focused activity, measuring, hammering, and tidying up with the intensity of a pit crew at Daytona. Fire Marshal Frank Miller was scheduled to arrive at 3:30 p.m. sharp. I was pacing the dirt patch that would one day be my front yard, my phone clutched in my hand. At 2:45 p.m., it rang. It was the school nurse. "Mr. Davis, this is Nurse Carol from Northwood Elementary. Mia is in my office. She has a bit of a fever, 101.2. School policy says she needs to be picked up." My stomach dropped. Of course, it's a law of the universe. On the most important, time-sensitive day of your life, your child will spontaneously develop a mild but non-negotiable illness. "My wife is in a meeting across town," I said, my mind racing. "I'll be right there." The school was, mercifully, only a 5-minute drive. 2 blocks from my house. I did the mental math. Pick up Mia, get her home, give her some Tylenol, and be back by 3:15, maybe 3:20 at the latest. Plenty of time before Frank arrived. I yelled to Dave that I had a kid emergency and jumped in my car. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. The school pickup line is a special kind of anarchy, a slow-moving demolition derby of minivans and SUVs driven by parents who are 90% caffeine and 10% raw desperation. But today was different. Today it wasn't moving at all. The entire line was at a dead standstill, cars backed up halfway down the block. And then I saw it. The source of the clog. The white whale. Brenda's Escalade. It was parked. Not just stopped, but engine off, driver's side door open, parked. Directly in the fire lane, a swath of asphalt painted a furious, impossible-to-miss shade of red. She had bypassed the entire plebeian line and created her own personal VIP spot right at the front door. She wasn't even in the car. She was standing on the curb, chatting animatedly with another mom, her laughter echoing in the humid air, while a dozen cars idled behind her, trapped. I threw my car into park, a hot spike of anger piercing through my inspection day anxiety. I got out and speed-walked toward her, the sounds of frustrated car horns starting to swell. "Brenda!" I called out, trying to keep my voice level. "Excuse me, you're blocking the entire fire lane. Nobody can get through." She turned, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second when she saw it was me. She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, hello, Mark. I'll just be a minute. I'm waiting for little Braden to finish his robotics club. You know how it is." "I do," I said, the words coming out clipped. "And I also know that this is a fire lane. It's illegal, and it's dangerous. There are signs every 10 feet. Could you please move your car so the rest of us can pick up our sick kids?" The other mom she was talking to suddenly found something fascinating on her phone and took a step back. Brenda's expression hardened. The strained pleasantness was gone, replaced by pure, distilled condescension. "Are you telling me how to conduct myself?" she asked, her voice low. "After the absolute eyesore you've made of your property? Frankly, I think you have bigger things to worry about than where I park for 5 minutes. The president of the HOA has certain informal privileges." She turned her back on me, a clear dismissal, and that was it. That was the snap. It was the culmination of everything. The petty violations, the constant scrutiny, the stress of the renovation, the sick kid waiting in the nurse's office, the time ticking down on the most important inspection of the build. And now, this breathtaking display of arrogance, this claim of informal privileges to break a law designed to save children's lives, all delivered with a smug little smile. My internal narrator didn't even have a sarcastic comment. He was just screaming, a primal, silent, unending scream. I stood there for a second, my hands clenched into fists. Then, a thought, clear as a bell, cut through the red haze of my anger. A man who, according to Dave, had a particular dislike for people who think they're above the law. I checked my watch. 3:18 p.m. I turned without another word and walked back toward my car, pulling out my phone. I scrolled to the number Dave had given me. Frank Miller, Fire Marshal. He picked up on the second ring. "Miller." "Hey, Frank, it's Mark Davis. We have the 3:30 inspection at my place on Sterling Creek Drive." "Yep, I'm about 5 minutes out, Mr. Davis. Everything ready for me?" His voice was gruff, all business. "Almost," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "So, funny story. I'm on my way back to the house right now, but I'm a bit pinned down at Northwood Elementary. Yeah, the school 2 blocks from my place. The fire lane is completely blocked by an SUV, and the owner is, well, she's refusing to move it. Holding up the whole line." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "A white Escalade?" he asked. My eyebrows shot up. "Yeah, how'd you know?" "I drive past that school every day. She's a regular. I'm turning onto your street now. Tell you what, I'll swing by the school on my way. See you in a minute." He hung up. I leaned against my car, crossed my arms, and waited. It didn't take long. Less than 2 minutes later, a cherry-red Ford F-150 with official county logos and a light bar on the roof pulled in behind the Escalade. The light bar wasn't flashing, but it didn't need to be. It had an aura of authority that Brenda's vehicle, for all its size and price, suddenly lacked. Fire Marshal Frank Miller got out. He was exactly as I'd pictured. Late 50s, stocky, with a formidable gray mustache that looked like it could stop a speeding bullet. His expression was one of profound, professional boredom. He had seen it all, and he was not impressed. He walked up to Brenda, who was still chatting, oblivious. "Ma'am," Frank said, his voice not loud but carrying with the weight of law. "Is this your vehicle?" Brenda turned, her annoyance immediately visible. "Yes, it is. I'm the HOA president. I'll be moving in just a moment." She said HOA president. like it was a diplomatic title that came with immunity. Frank's face didn't change. He was already writing on a clipboard. The HOA doesn't supersede state fire code. You're parked in a designated fire lane at an elementary school during dismissal. I need your license and registration, please. Now wait just a minute, Brenda sputtered, her face starting to flush. This is ridiculous. I was only here for a second. It only takes a second for a fire to start, Frank said, his voice flat and deadpan. He held out his hand for her documents. As Brenda fumbled in her oversized purse, a police cruiser, summoned by Frank, quietly pulled up. Out stepped Officer Garcia, a man whose weary posture suggested he'd responded to calls like this 1,000 times. He watched as Frank finished writing the ticket and handed it to Brenda. She looked at the fine amount, and her mouth fell open in a perfect, silent O of outrage. Then came the final, beautiful, cinematic moment. A tow truck, also summoned by the authorities, lumbered into the lot. The driver got out, all business, and started hooking up Brenda's pristine Escalade. The other parents in the pickup line, who had been watching the drama unfold in stunned silence, began to whisper. A few of them, hiding behind their steering wheels, gave me subtle thumbs-ups. I saw one mom discreetly filming the whole thing on her phone. Brenda was now arguing with Officer Garcia, her voice rising in pitch. He just listened patiently, nodding, a master of de-escalation. I finally got Mia from the nurse's office. Holding her hand, I walked past the scene. Brenda saw me, and her eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom. I gave Fire Marshal Frank a small, respectful nod. He just tipped the brim of his cap an inch, a silent acknowledgement between two reasonable men in a world of chaos. As the tow truck hauled the suburban assault vehicle away, a smattering of applause broke out from a few of the cars. The logjam was clear. The system worked. I got Mia home, tucked her in with a cold cloth on her head, and made it back to my house at 3:35. Frank was already there, clipboard in hand, waiting patiently. He looked up as I approached. "Sorry for the delay," he said, the corner of his mustache twitching. "Had to clear up a little obstruction?" "No problem at all," I replied, a wide grin spreading across my face for the first time in weeks. "Take all the time you need." The inspection passed with flying colors. I should have known that poking the hornet's nest would have consequences. I had won a glorious public victory, but Brenda wasn't the type to accept defeat. She was the type to retreat, rearm, and launch a campaign of overwhelming retaliatory force. The first volley was fired on the neighborhood Facebook group that evening. The video of Brenda's Escalade being ignominiously towed had gone viral, at least within our 200-home subdivision. The comment section was a war zone. Sharon from down the street. "It's about time. She's been parking there for years. Good for whoever finally called her out on it." Brenda's second in command, Linda. "This is a shameful attack on a dedicated community volunteer. The person who did this should be ashamed of themselves for wasting our emergency services' valuable time over a simple parking mistake. A guy named Chad I'd never met. LOL, get wrecked, Karen." The battle lines were drawn. You were either Team Mark or Team Brenda. There was no middle ground. I woke up the next morning feeling like a conquering hero. The sun was shining. The construction was on schedule. The world was full of possibility. Then I opened my front door. Taped to the door, fluttering in the morning breeze, was a stack of paper. It was a flurry of new violation notices from the Sterling Creek Estates HOA, each one printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock that screamed, "Official business." Brenda had clearly spent her entire evening poring over the 300-page HOA covenant, cross-referencing my property with every arcane rule she could find. It was a masterpiece of petty vengeance. I sat at my kitchen table, Sarah looking over my shoulder, as I read them aloud. Violation 1. Unapproved number of nails visible on exterior sheathing. According to Article 7, Section 4C, all fastening materials must be minimally visible to preserve a clean and uncluttered facade. "The siding isn't even on yet," Sarah exclaimed. "It's a work in progress." Apparently, our progress is cluttered. Violation 2, non-uniform soil coloration in front yard. The presence of red clay is inconsistent with the approved verdant aesthetic of the community. She's fining us for having dirt. Correct. We are being fined for dirt. Violation 3. I had to pause to truly appreciate this one. A fine for Mia's pink bicycle being left on the driveway yesterday for, and I quote, more than the allotted 60 minutes of recreational parking. That was the one that did it. Sarah, who had for weeks been my voice of reason, the one counseling patience and diplomacy, went rigid. Her eyes narrowed. "Okay," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "That's it. My daughter's pink bicycle? After she was home sick with a fever? Oh, hell no. She's not just coming after you anymore, Mark. She's coming after our family. The gloves are off. No more Mr. Nice Guy." A fierce, protective love for my wife bloomed in my chest. We were a team, the Davis family against the world, or at least against the tyrannical HOA president down the street. The final violation was the most insidious. A formal demand that all construction vehicles, including contractor personal vehicles and material delivery trucks, be parked a minimum of 200 feet from any other resident's property line. I showed the list to Dave when he arrived, steaming mug of coffee in hand. He read through them, a low whistle escaping his lips. "Wow," he said, handing the papers back. "She's going nuclear. This last one is a poison pill. There's nowhere to park a dump truck or a concrete mixer 200 feet from a property line in this neighborhood without blocking the whole street. She's trying to make it impossible for us to get materials delivered. She's not trying to fine you anymore, my friend. She's trying to shut you down." He took a long sip of his coffee, his eyes crinkling. "You poked the bear. Now she's trying to bleed you dry with 1,000 paper cuts. You need a strategy." He was right. This was no longer just a feud. This was war. And Brenda had just launched a full-scale offensive. It was time to plan our counterattack. Our opening salvo was one of glorious, maddening, malicious compliance. That weekend, Sarah and I armed ourselves with coffee, 2 yellow highlighters, and a printed copy of the entire HOA covenant. For 2 days, we read. We absorbed the arcane language, the ridiculous specifics, the endless clauses and subclauses. It was more boring than watching paint dry, but it was also illuminating. The rulebook was a labyrinth of contradictions and poorly defined terms, and we were about to use that to our advantage. For every single violation notice, we drafted a meticulous, legally flavored response. For the visible nails violation, we cited Article X, Section 1A, which stated that all properties must remain in compliance with county building codes, codes which, we happily pointed out, required a specific number of visible nails for sheathing inspection. For the non-uniform soil violation, we politely inquired which of the 27 approved shades of green grass seed we should use to plant over the clay before the final grading and sodding, as the covenant was strangely silent on the matter. For Mia's bicycle, we attached a doctor's note confirming she was homesick and cited a non-existent but official-sounding child wellness and recreation exemption. For each fine, we formally requested a hearing before the full Architectural Review Committee, as was our right according to the bylaws. Our goal was simple: to bury Brenda in her own bureaucracy. Every violation she wrote would now generate a mountain of paperwork and a scheduled meeting on her end. We were turning her weapon back on her. Brenda, of course, escalated. She couldn't get us on the rules, so she resorted to harassment. She began calling the police for noise disturbances. The first time, A young, earnest rookie named Officer Miller showed up. He was polite, checked our permits, noted that the crew was working within the legal time frame, and left. The second time, 3 days later, we got Officer Garcia, the veteran from the towing incident. He sighed when he saw me. "Let me guess," he said, gesturing vaguely at my house. "It's too loud?" "Apparently the sound of progress is offensive," I said. He checked the permit, nodded, and got back in his car. But before he left, he rolled down his window. "Look, man," he said, his voice low. "We know what's going on. She calls, we have to show up. It's a waste of our time and your time. Just keep your permits handy, don't give her any real ammunition, and we'll make these visits as quick as possible. Between you and me, we've got a file on her calls. It's getting pretty thick." It was a small comfort, but it was something. We weren't crazy. Even the cops knew she was unhinged. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I was out front one afternoon when my elderly neighbor from across the street, Mr. Henderson, was tending to his prize-winning rose bushes. He was a quiet, gentle man, a retired accountant who lived for his garden. "Afternoon, Mark," he said, wiping his brow. "Another day in paradise, eh?" "Something like that," I chuckled. "Just waiting for the mail to see what new laws I've broken today." He smiled sadly. "I know the feeling. I received a citation last week. My Crimson Glory roses are, apparently, an unapproved shade of red." I stared at him. "You're kidding." "I wish I were," he said. "Brenda's been running this neighborhood like her own personal fiefdom for 10 years. Most people just pay the fines to make her go away. It's easier than fighting." That was it. That was the key. She ruled by fear and exhaustion. I spent the next few days talking to people. A young couple was fined because their toddler's playset was made of cedar instead of the committee-preferred redwood. Another family was told their basketball hoop had to be taken down every night. The stories were everywhere. Everyone was miserable, but everyone was fighting their battles alone. It was time to form a rebellion. That Thursday night, I invited a small group over. It was me, Sarah, Mr. Henderson, and the young couple, the Thompsons. We sat on folding chairs in my half-finished living room, a single work lamp casting long shadows on the exposed studs. It felt clandestine, like a meeting of revolutionaries. We shared our stories, our ridiculous violations, our frustrations. It was cathartic. We weren't alone. Then Mr. Henderson, the quiet accountant, cleared his throat. "An organization like this, a 501(c)(4), has to maintain financial records," he said, his eyes gleaming with a surprising intensity. "And according to the bylaws, any homeowner has the right to inspect those records upon written request." He leaned forward. "She can bully us with subjective rules about aesthetics, but numbers? Numbers don't lie. Let's audit her." It was a brilliant idea. The next day, I drafted a formal letter requesting a full review of the HOA's financial statements for the past 3 years. Brenda couldn't refuse, not legally. She stalled for a week, but eventually, a thick binder of spreadsheets and bank statements was begrudgingly handed over. We gave it to Mr. Henderson. It was like handing a Stradivarius to a concert violinist. For 2 days, he was silent. Then he called another meeting. He spread the papers out on my makeshift plywood coffee table. "It's worse than I thought," he said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "It's not just mismanagement, it's a piggy bank." The discoveries were damning. The HOA's lucrative landscaping contract belonged to a company owned by Brenda's brother-in-law, and they were charging nearly double the market rate. There were thousands of dollars in vague, consulting fees paid to an LLC that Mr. Henderson traced back to a P.O. box registered under Brenda's maiden name. And the money for the new community playground, approved by a vote 3 years ago? It was sitting in a low-interest savings account, untouched. She wasn't just a bully. She was lining her own pockets. "The annual HOA meeting and board elections are in 3 weeks," Sarah said, her voice firm. Mr. Henderson looked up from the papers, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Exactly. And this year I think we should all make a point to attend." For the next 3 weeks, our construction site became the unofficial headquarters for a suburban coup. We operated with the secrecy of a spy ring. Brenda, consumed by our paperwork war and confident in her impending unopposed re-election, had no idea what was coming. Our strategy was two-pronged. First, the data. Mr. Henderson was our general, transforming the dry financial data into a series of clear, undeniable charts and graphs. The overpriced landscaping, the consulting fees, the missing playground fund, he laid it all out in a presentation so simple and damning that anyone could understand it. He was a wizard with a spreadsheet. The second prong was the people. Sarah and I, along with the Thompsons, divided up the neighborhood. We went door to door, but not with accusations. We started by sharing our own story. We showed them the violation for Mia's pink bike. It was the perfect icebreaker. Every parent's eyes widened in disbelief and solidarity. "We're not asking you to vote for anyone," Sarah would say calmly. "We're just asking you to come to the annual meeting. It's our community. We should all have a voice in it." The response was overwhelming. People were tired of the bullying, of the arbitrary fines. They just needed a catalyst, a reason to believe that showing up would actually make a difference. We were giving them that reason. We were building an army, one disgruntled homeowner at a time. Brenda, meanwhile, remained blissfully ignorant. Her hubris was her blind spot. She saw my counter-arguments and hearing requests not as a strategic campaign, but as the death throes of a troublemaker. In her mind, she was winning, and that made her sloppy. She made her final mistake a week before the meeting. A massive flatbed truck carrying a dozen pallets of drywall was scheduled for delivery. It was a critical shipment that would allow Dave's crew to finally start closing up the walls. The driver, a seasoned pro, legally parked on the street, taking care not to block any driveways or fire hydrants. Brenda descended like a hawk. I watched from my window as her Escalade blocked the truck's path. She got out and marched up to the driver. I couldn't hear the words, but her body language was unmistakable. Pointing, lecturing, threatening. A few minutes later, the driver, looking confused and annoyed, got back in his truck. He handed a form to one of Dave's crew, backed his rig out, and drove away. The drywall was gone. Dave stormed over to me, a slip of paper in his hand. "You are not going to believe this," he growled. She told the driver he was violating a new HOA emergency ordinance against commercial deliveries on residential streets. She said his truck would be towed if he didn't leave immediately. "There's no such ordinance," I said, horrified. "Of course there isn't. She made it up on the spot. The driver didn't want his rig impounded, so he left. And now," Dave said, waving the paper, "we have to pay a hefty rescheduling and restocking fee, and we won't get the drywall for another 2 weeks. She just cost you thousands of dollars and ground our project to a halt." I felt a surge of white-hot anger, but then a cold, clear thought cut through it. Evidence. "Did the driver get her name?" I asked. "Yep," Dave said. "And the trucking company is furious. They're documenting the whole incident. They'll happily sign an affidavit." It was the final nail for her coffin. Brenda had crossed the line from petty harassment to tortious interference. She had abused her position to lie and cause direct, significant financial harm. We had the financials. We had the people. And now, we had an unimpeachable story of her malfeasance, complete with a signed statement from a commercial trucking company. The ambush was set. All we had to do was wait for the annual meeting. The Sterling Creek Estates clubhouse was a monument to beige. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige folding chairs. It smelled faintly of stale coffee and quiet desperation. Usually, the annual HOA meeting attracted about 5 people. Brenda, her 2 sycophantic cronies on the board, Linda and Carol, and maybe 2 other retirees with nothing better to do. Tonight, it was standing room only. Sarah and I arrived early and watched as the room filled up. There were the Thompsons, Mr. Henderson with a neat manila folder, and dozens of other faces I recognized from our door-to-door campaign. Over 50 residents, a record-breaking turnout, had packed into the small room. Brenda arrived, flanked by her board members, and stopped dead in the doorway. A flicker of genuine shock crossed her face, quickly replaced by a tight, forced smile. She saw the crowd not as a community, but as an audience, and she clearly believed they were here to admire her. She took her place at the head table and banged a small gavel. "Welcome, everyone, to the annual meeting. It's so wonderful to see such a robust turnout this year." She launched into her standard speech, a 20-minute monologue about the importance of maintaining our community's high standards and protecting our property values. She made several pointed remarks about disruptive elements and the importance of preserving a consistent aesthetic, each one accompanied by a brief, withering glare in my direction. I just smiled back placidly. Finally, she finished. "And now, the floor is open for any new business before we move to the board elections." This was our cue. I stood up. "I have some new business to discuss." A murmur went through the room. Brenda's smile tightened. "Very well, Mark. The floor is yours." I walked to the front, holding a thin folder. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't attack her. I simply told my story. "My name is Mark Davis, and my family and I are building an addition on our home on Sterling Creek Drive. We went through all the proper channels, got all the permits, and had our plans approved by this very board. But for the past 2 months, my family has been subjected to a campaign of targeted harassment under the guise of HOA rule enforcement." I held up the violation notice. "It started with things that were merely absurd, like this fine for my sick daughter's pink bicycle, and this one for the color of the dirt in my yard." Gasps and angry whispers rippled through the crowd. "But it escalated," I continued, my voice steady. I detailed the constant police calls and then held up the affidavit. "And it culminated last week when our HOA president, Brenda, falsely represented herself to a delivery driver, claiming a non-existent ordinance, and forced him to leave. This action cost my family thousands of dollars and has delayed our project by weeks." The room was silent, hanging on every word. "This isn't about protecting property values. This is a personal vendetta. And it made me wonder, if this is how the HOA's power is being used, how is our money being used?" I turned to Mr. Henderson. "And for that, I'd like to yield the floor to my neighbor, a retired CPA, Mr. Henderson." Mr. Henderson, looking more like a kindly grandfather than a revolutionary, calmly walked to the front and set up a projector. One by one, he put his damning charts on the screen. The landscaping contract with Brenda's brother-in-law, showing they'd overpaid by nearly $100,000 over 5 years. The consulting fees to Brenda's shell company. The $50,000 playground fund sitting dormant for 3 years. With every slide, Brenda's face grew paler. Her cronies, Linda and Carol, looked like they wanted to be swallowed by the beige carpet. The murmurs in the room grew into a low, angry buzz. Empowered by the revelations, other residents started to stand up. The Thompsons spoke about the fine for their son's playset. An older woman tearfully recounted being fined for putting up a small memorial flag for her late husband. The dam of fear had broken, and a flood of grievances poured out. Brenda, cornered and exposed, finally found her voice. "This is an outrage! A coordinated attack! These are lies and misinterpretations!" she shrieked, banging her gavel. Just then, the clubhouse door opened. Standing there was Fire Marshal Frank Miller. He was in his official uniform. I had called him earlier in the week, not as an ally, but as a concerned citizen. I'd told him that, given the recent fire lane incident, I thought the community could benefit from a professional presentation on residential safety. He had agreed. "Am I interrupting?" Frank asked, his calm voice cutting through the chaos. "Fire Marshal Miller," I said, feigning surprise. No, you're right on time. As part of our community meeting, we've invited the fire marshal to give us a brief presentation on home and neighborhood safety. Brenda's jaw dropped. She couldn't object without looking like she was against safety. Frank walked to the front of the room, radiating an aura of no-nonsense authority. He gave a perfectly standard 5-minute talk about smoke detectors and grill safety. But then he paused, and his eyes swept the room. "And finally," he said, his gaze landing squarely on Brenda, "I cannot overstate the importance of keeping our shared access ways clear. Fire lanes, especially around places with vulnerable populations like schools, are not suggestions. They are a matter of life and death. Blocking one isn't just inconsiderate, it's reckless, it's illegal, and it demonstrates a profound disregard for the safety of your neighbors and their children." He didn't mention her. He didn't have to. The message was delivered with the force of a battering ram. The story had come full circle. Brenda, the self-proclaimed protector of the community, had been unmasked by a real public servant as the single greatest danger to it. She shrank in her chair, utterly defeated. After Frank finished, an awkward silence fell. Then Brenda, in a small voice, said, It's time for the board elections." Mr. Henderson stood up. "I nominate Carol Peterson for president." Carol, one of the board members who had looked increasingly horrified by the revelations, gave a hesitant nod. Someone else seconded the motion. The vote was a sea of hands. It was nearly unanimous. Brenda had been dethroned. The week after the meeting, a "For Sale" sign appeared on Brenda's perfectly manicured lawn. It was planted slightly crooked. I resisted the powerful urge to go outside with a level and a camera, then write her a formal notice. Some urges are best left unsatisfied. The new HOA, under the quiet and sensible leadership of President Carroll, held an emergency session. Their first act was to formally void every single fine Brenda had issued in the past year. An email went out to the entire neighborhood, and you could almost hear the collective sigh of relief. Their second act was to put the landscaping contract out for competitive bid. Their third was to break ground on the playground. Our construction resumed, unhindered. Deliveries arrived without incident. Dave's crew worked with a new lightness, no longer looking over their shoulders for the white Escalade. As they installed the final piece of trim on our new front porch, Dave leaned against a column and clapped me on the back. "Well, kid," he said, a rare grin on his face. "Told you the city permits were the easy part? You fought the law, and you actually won." Months later, the house was finished. It was everything Sarah and I had dreamed of, every napkin sketch brought to life. To celebrate, we threw a huge backyard BBQ. The entire neighborhood was there. The Thompsons, Mr. Henderson, President Carroll, even Officer Garcia, who was off duty and lived a few streets over. The yard was filled with laughter and the smell of grilling burgers. In the distance, I could hear the happy shrieks of children, my own included, playing on the brand-new community playground. Sarah came up beside me and handed me a cold beer. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." I looked out at the scene. Neighbors talking, kids playing, a community no longer living under the thumb of a petty tyrant. It was peaceful. It was right. I took a long sip of my beer, a feeling of deep, profound satisfaction washing over me. They say you can't fight City Hall. But sometimes the most important battles aren't fought downtown. Sometimes the real war is for the soul of your own neighborhood, waged over crooked signs and the color of a porta-potty. And sometimes all you need to win is a sick kid, a ticking clock, and a fire marshal on speed dial. The war was over. I was finally home.